This is On the Hunt at foxnews.com. I'm Jonathan Hunt. Hello, everybody. Almost exactly 12 months ago, Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula. Still today, 12 months on, Russia is sending weapons and other forms of support to rebels in eastern Ukraine, seeking, it seems, to destabilize the government of Ukraine and perhaps seize even more territory. All of this comes with an effect, of course, on U.S.-Russia relations, which are said by some experts to be at their lowest point since the dark days of the Cold War. To discuss all of this, I'm joined now by Dr. Stephen Blank, who is a senior fellow for Russia at the American Foreign Policy Council, and Job Henning, who is a fellow with the Truman National Security Project. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Dr. Blank, let me start with you. We have so much focus in our limited attention span these days for international crises. We talk about ISIS and the Middle East all the time. How serious is this other geopolitical crisis with Russia, Ukraine, and the U.S. on the other side?
Well, to be frank, I think it is the greatest threat to international security today, much greater than ISIS, because it is the first aggression of its kind since Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait 25 years ago, where one sovereign state has simply decided to annex the territory of another and thumb its nose at all the agreements it has signed and at international order more generally. It's a very dangerous precedent, not just for Russia.
And Joe, picking up on Dr. Blank's point, the rest of the world seems to have essentially let Russia get away with this invasion, as Dr. Blank puts it.
Well, I would first of all agree with Stephen's comments. I think it is a very dangerous situation. I think it's even more so given the fact you've got two very capable, symmetric competitors that aren't really recognizing their capabilities or treating each other very carefully. I don't think it's fair to characterize the rest of the world as accepting the behavior of Russia. I think the level of activity you've seen through the sanctions regimes over the last 12 months and the seriousness with which you've seen this debated inside the NATO alliance indicates that you've got a lot of serious attention on the issue. I think, however, there's obviously a lot less than political consensus on how to proceed in countering Russia's actions in this part of Europe.
Yeah, and that's that point, Joe. How do you think that the rest of the world can proceed with what a lot of people might seem as more effect? I agree that there have been the sanctions, there's been the debate, but it hasn't changed Russia's behavior in any way.
Well, it certainly hasn't changed it yet, or at least not in a way that's obvious. I think the issue before us right now with Crimea, the discussion about placing nuclear weapons there, is really indicative of a lot of loose talk on both sides. And I think on the side of the NATO alliance, there's been some fairly facile comments about arming different parts of Ukraine or the Ukrainian government in the east. Those have been debated sort of in an almost an offhand sort of way in Congress and NATO and in the press. I don't think that's how you want to treat another country that is a nuclear-capable country. And I think in reverse, from the Russian side, I think you see some very offhanded ways of talking about nuclear capabilities that is truly very different than anything we saw during the Cold War. And I think it's precisely that, drifting into a strategic confrontation that neither really recognize or appreciate, that makes it a truly dangerous situation.
So, Dr. Blank, how do you feel that the U.S. and Europe, of course, as our partners, should proceed in deterring further Russian behavior like this and reversing what has already happened?
I think that we need to understand the necessity for a coordinated, multidimensional strategy, which includes arming and systematic training of the Ukrainian army, tighter sanctions, major investment in information capabilities to thwart Russian propaganda, not only in Europe, but inside Russia as well. The reinforcement and invigoration of the NATO alliance, U.S. energy exports to Europe, signing the Atlantic Trade Pact that is now before Congress, and creating stronger Ukrainian state, both in terms of its political and economic institutions. If we fail to act in a strategic way that embraces all of these areas, just giving weapons to Ukraine without giving them enough training to use them or strengthening the Ukrainian state will not be productive.
Job, it's a good point. And for those of us who are perhaps less well informed than you and Dr. Blank, it's easy to think, okay, let's arm our friends in these situations and give them better training, better weapons, and that will be enough. It is, as Dr. Blank points out, is it not, a much more holistic approach that is necessary?
Well, absolutely. I agree with all Dr. Blank's comments. I would just hesitate, though, to point out we're really not very good at arming our allies. We weren't good at it in Vietnam. We weren't good at it in Afghanistan. We weren't good at it in Iraq. We need to treat that very, very carefully. Everything Stephen said is absolutely the case. However, I think we have to be very realistic about two things. We have to be realistic about our ability to build the capacity of the Ukrainian government to actually receive and absorb and responsibly use those military capabilities. And we have to be realistic about Russian reactions to those actions now. I was a proponent of arming the Ukrainian government about a year ago. I think these are things you do before actions are taken. I think when you're in a hot conflict 300 miles from the capital of the Russian Federation, I think you want to be very, very careful, even about the language you use. I am a fan about horizontal escalation. I think there's an awful lot you can do outside of that hot theater. There are a lot of things that you can do in the Caucasus and Central Asia and for Russian interests around the world, and certainly around sanctions and severing Russian access to the international financial system. Those are severe things to do, but they absolutely have to be done. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Either you're going to be in an alliance with the West and integrating into the West, or you're going to be a strategic competitor, and they've got to decide who they are.
One last question to both of you, and I'll let you pick it up first, Job. How we see Russia carrying out these kind of actions. We see opposition members like Boris Nemtsov murdered on the streets of Moscow. What is going on in Russia? What is Putin's aim with everything that we have seen happen over the last 12 months? Is he acting haphazardly, or does he have a strategic vision here? And if so, what on earth is it?
Well, Jonathan, as you no doubt know, that's a subject of a lot of discussion. I think there's certainly a tactical element to his actions. That said, I think we've seen some of these steps taken before. These are some well-worn paths in terms of reasserting Russian influence in a neo-imperialistic sort of way across both the former Soviet territories, but really as a pan-European power, harkening back to the imperial legacy of Russia. I think at a fundamental level, Russia has not yet decided if it can live as a modern nation state within its boundaries. And I think until, as a Russian nation, they decide kind of who they want to be, this is going to be a perennial problem. I do think it's important not to underestimate how well Putin understands these things, and I do think it's important to not underestimate the strategic ambitions he has with respect to threatening pan-European security.
Yeah, and so Dr. Blank, the same question to you to wrap it up. How dangerous is Putin?
Well, he's extremely dangerous. I see all the events that are taking place as part of his strategy, although there's certainly an element of tactical improvisation when opportunities present themselves or have to be dealt with because something came out of the blue. But the objective here is twofold. One is to consolidate Putin's dictatorship along lines that are increasingly neo-Tsarist and, for that matter, fascist, which means imperial. Indeed, the empire is the only way Putin's regime can survive at home, which is why Ukraine as a democracy is such a threat. And therefore, we are going to see constant probes by Russia unless we thwart them in Ukraine. I agree that there's a risk involved, but the record of helping countries defend themselves against Russian aggression is not nearly as bad as Job suggests. We actually did quite well in giving the Afghans the weapons with which to defeat a Soviet invasion, and we could do the same for Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are coming together on their own to build effective policies and institutions. What they need is support, encouragement, and considerable pressure, but I think they want to make that move as well. So I think what we are facing really is a terrorist and fascistic-like dictatorship that wants to restore the Russian Empire.
A fascinating subject and a very important crisis for the rest of the world to face up to. Thank you both very much for being here. Dr. Stephen Blank, Senior Fellow for Russia at the American Foreign Policy Council, and Job Henning, Fellow with the Truman National Security Project. A real honor and pleasure to talk to you both, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, this has been On the Hunt at foxnews.com.